We are back with part 2 of this week's reading of the Messianic Jewish Family Bible, Tree of Life version. And this week we are concluding the second book of Kings, reading chapters 13 to 25. And we are at chapter 16. In the 17th year of Pekah, son of Remaliah, Ahaz, son of King Jotham of Judah, began to reign. Ahaz was 20 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 16 years in Jerusalem. But he did not do what was right in the eyes of Adonai his God, as his father David had done. Instead, he walked in the way of the kings of Israel, and even made his son pass through the fire, like the abomination of the nations whom Adonai had dispossessed before Benaiah Israel. He offered sacrifices and burned incense on the high places and on the hills, and under every leafy tree. Then King Rezin of Aram and Pekah, son of King Remaliah of Israel, marched against Jerusalem to wage war. They besieged Ahaz, but could not overcome him. At that time King Rezin of Aram recovered Elath for Aram, and drove the Jews out of Elath. Then the Edomites came to Elath and settled there to this day. So Ahaz sent messengers to King Tiglath-Pileser of Assyria, saying, I am your servant and your son. Come up and deliver me from the hand of the king of Aram, and from the hand of the king of Israel, who are rising up against me. Ahaz took the silver and gold that was found in the house of Adonai and in the treasures of the royal palace, and sent them as a present to the king of Assyria. So the king of Assyria responded to him. The king of Assyria marched up against Damascus and captured it, and deported its inhabitants as captives to Kir, Kir, and put Rezin to death. Ahaz remodels the temple. Then King Ahaz went to Damascus to meet King Tiglath-Pileser of Assyria, and saw the altar that was Damascus. So King Ahaz sent to Urijah the Kohen the pattern of the altar and its model needed for its construction. Then Urijah the Kohen built an altar according to all that King Ahaz had sent from Damascus, and Urijah the Kohen finished it by the time King Ahaz returned from Damascus. When the king came back from Damascus and saw the altar, the king approached the altar and went up to it. Then he burned his burnt offering and his grain offering, poured his drink offering, and sprinkled the blood of his fellowship offerings on the altar. As for the bronze altar that was before Adonai, he moved it from the forefront of the house, from between his altar and the house of Adonai, and put it on the north side of his own altar. Then King Ahaz commanded Urijah the Kohen, saying, Upon the great altar you will burn the morning burnt offering and the evening grain offering, the king's burnt offering and his grain offering, with the burnt offering of all the people of the land, and their grain offering and their drink offering. Also sprinkle on it all the blood of the burnt offering and all the blood of the sacrifices. But the bronze altar will be for me to inquire by. Then Urijah the Kohen did everything just as King Ahaz commanded. Then King Ahaz cut off the borders of the stands and removed the laver from them. He also took down the seat from the bronze oxen that were under it and put it on a stone pavement. They covered passageway for Shabbat that they had built in the house, as well as the outer entry for the king. He removed from the house of Adonai because of the king of Assyria. Now the rest of the acts of Ahaz, which he did, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of Kings of Judah? Then Ahaz slept with his fathers and was buried with his fathers in the city of David. Then his son Hezekiah became king in his place. In So we're going on to chapter 17. The Israelites are deported to Assyria. Now this is the northern kingdom. In the 12th year of King Ahaz of Judah, Hoshea, son of Elah, became king in Samaria over Israel, and he reigned 9 years. He did what was evil in Adonai's eyes, yet not as the kings of Israel who were before him. King Shalmaneser of Assyria marched against him, so Hoshea became his vassal and paid him tribute. But the king of Assyria caught Hoshea conspiring, and he had sent messengers to King So of Egypt, and had not paid the tribute to the king of Assyria as he had done every year. Therefore the king of Assyria seized him and put him in prison. Then the king of Assyria invaded the entire country, marched up to Samaria, and besieged it for 3 years. In the 9th year of Hoshea, the king of Assyria captured Samaria and deported the Israelites to Assyria. He placed them in Hela and Habor on the Gozan River and in the towns of the Medes. Now it was so because the men of Israel had sinned against Adonai their God, who brought them up out of the land of Egypt from under the hand of Pharaoh king of Egypt, and had feared other gods. Instead they followed the customs of the nations whom Adonai has dispossessed before Bani Israel, yet which the kings of Israel practiced. Bani Israel secretly did things against Adonai their God that that were not right. They built shrines for themselves in all their settlements, from watchtowers to fortified cities, and they set up pillars and Asherah poles for themselves on every high hill and under every leafy tree. There they burned incense on all the high places, like the nations whom Adonai had driven out before them. So they did wicked things to provoke Adonai. They worshipped idols, about which Adonai had said to them, "You shall not do this thing." Yet Adonai had forewarned Israel and Judah by the hand of every prophet and every seer, saying, "Turn from your evil ways and keep my commandments and my statutes, according to all the Torah which I commanded your father and which I sent to you by the hand of the servants and the prophets." Yet they would not listen, but stiffened their neck like their fathers, who did not trust in Adonai their God. So they rejected his statutes and his covenant that he made with their fathers, and his testimonies that he testified against them. Instead, they went after futile things and became futile, following the nations that surrounded them, about whom Adonai had charged them not to emulate. So they abandoned all the mitzvot of Adonai their God. So they made for themselves molten images, 2 calves, and made Asherah pole, and bowed down to all the host of heavens, and worshipped Baal. And they made their sons and daughters pass through the fire, practiced divination and enchantments, and sold themselves to do evil in Adonai's eyes to provoke him. So Adonai became very angry with Israel and banished them from his presence. There was none left but the tribe of Judah alone. Even Judah did not keep the mitzvot of Adonai their God, but followed the customs which Israel had practiced. So Adonai spurned all the descendants of Israel and afflicted them and delivered them into the hands of plunderers, until he had cast them out of his sight. When he had torn Israel from the house of David, they had made Jeroboam son of Nebat king. Then Jeroboam drew Israel away from following Adonai, made them commit a great sin. The men of Israel kept walking in all the sins that Jeroboam committed. They did not turn away from them until Adonai banished Israel from his presence, as he spoke, by the hand of all his servants the prophets. So Israel had been exiled from their own land to Assyria to this day, and they did not return. They remained scattered, just to give you a heads up on that. The origin of the Samaritans. Then the king of Assyria brought people from Babylon, Cutha, Ava, Hamath, and Sepharvaim, and placed them in the cities of Samaria instead of the men of Israel. So they possessed Samaria and settled in its cities. When they first began dwelling there, they did not fear Adonai, so Adonai sent lions among them, which killed some of them. Then they spoke to the king of Assyria, saying, "The nations that you deported and resettled in the towns of Samaria do not know the requirement of the God of the land. Therefore he sent lions among them, and behold, they are killing them, because they don't know the requirement of the God of the land." Then the king of Assyria commanded, saying, "Send there one of the Kohanim whom you have exiled from there. Let them go and live there, and teach them the requirement of the God of the land." So one of the Kohanim that had been deported from Samaria came and lived in Bethel, and taught them how they should fear Adonai. However, every nation kept making its own gods and put them in the shrines of the high places that the Samaritans had made, every nation in their cities. where they settled. So the people of Babylon made Succoth Benoth, the people of Cuth made Nergal, and the people of Hamath made Ashima. The Avites made Nebhaz and Tartak, and the Sepharvites burned their children in the fire to Adremelech and Enemelech, the gods of Sepharvaim. So they feared Adonai, while they also appointed for themselves from among themselves priests of the shrines who officiated for them in the shrines of the high places. They continued to fear Adonai, but worshipped their own gods after the custom of the nations from which they had been deported. Up to this day, they follow their former customs. Nor do they fear Adonai or follow the statutes, the ordinances, the Torah, or the mitzvot that Adonai commanded the children of Jacob, whom he had renamed Israel. With them Adonai had made a covenant and charged them, saying, "You will not fear other gods, or bow down to them, or serve them, or sacrifice to them, but only Adonai, who brought you up from the land of Egypt with great power and with an outstretched arm. Him will you fear, and to him will you bow down, and to him will you sacrifice. The statutes and the ordinances of the Torah and the mitzvot which he wrote for you, you will take care to do all the time. You are not to fear other gods. The covenant that I have made with you, you will not forget, nor will you fear other gods. But Adonai your God will you fear. Then he will deliver you from the hand of all your enemies. Yet they did not listen, but they continued their former practices. So while these nations feared Adonai, they also worshipped their idols. Their children and grandchildren do as their fathers did to this day. And that is the end of chapter 17. Chapter 18, Righteous King Hezekiah. So we're going to talk about Hezekiah for a little bit here in the upcoming chapters. Now it was the 3rd year of Hoshea son of Elah, king of Israel, that Hezekiah son of Ahaz, king of Judah, began to reign. He was 25 years old when he became king, and he reigned for 29 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Abi, daughter of Zechariah. He did what was right in Adonai's eyes, according to all his ancestor David had done. He removed the high places, smashed the pillars, and cut down the Asherah poles. He also broke in pieces the bronze serpent that Moses had made, for up to those days Bnei Israel were still burning incense to it. It was called Nehushtan, Nehushtan. He trusted in Adonai, the God of Israel. Indeed, none of all the kings of Judah after him was like him, and none before him, for he clung to Adonai. He did not turn away from following him. He kept his mitzvah, which Adonai had commanded Moses. So Adonai was with him. Wherever he went, he prospered. He rebelled against the king of Assyria and did not serve him. He defeated the Philistines as far as Gaza and its territories, from watchtower to fortified city. Now it came to pass in the 4th year of King Hezekiah, which was the 7th year of Hoshea son of King Elah of Israel, that King Shalmaneser of Assyria marched against Samaria and besieged it. And at the end of 3 years they captured it. So Samaria was captured in the 6th year of Hezekiah, which was the 9th year of King Hoshea of Israel. The king of Assyria deported Israel to Assyria and placed them in Halah and Habor on the Gozan River, and in the towns of the Medes. For they had not listened to the voice of Adonai their God, but transgressed his covenant, all that Moses the servant of Adonai had commanded. They neither listened nor did it. The next section is Proud Sennacherib challenges Hezekiah. Now in the 14th year of King Hezekiah, King Sennacherib of Assyria marched against all the fortified towns of Judah and seized them. So King Hezekiah of Judah sent word to the king of Assyria at Lachish, saying, I have done wrong. Withdraw from me. Whatever you impose on me, I will bear." So the king of Assyria imposed on King Hezekiah of Judah 300 talents of silver and 30 talents of gold. Then Hezekiah gave him all the silver that was found in the house of Adonai, as well as in the treasuries of the royal palace. At the same time Hezekiah stripped off the gold from the doors of the temple of Adonai and from the doorposts that King Hezekiah of Judah had overlaid, and gave them to the king of Assyria. Then the king of Assyria sent the Tartan, the Rabsaris, and the Rabshakeh from Lachish with a great army to King Hezekiah in Jerusalem. So they went up and arrived at Jerusalem. Now when they arrived, they stood by the conduit of the upper pool, which is on the highway of the fuller's field. When they had called to the king Eliakim, son of Hilkiah, who was in charge of the royal palace, Shebna the scribe, and Joah, son of Asaph the recorder, came out to them. So the Rabshakeh said to him, "Say now to Hezekiah, thus says the great king, the king of Assyria, what is this confidence you relied on? You say you have a plan and military force for battle. They are only words of a lip. Who do you rely on now, so that you have rebelled against me? Behold, you rely on this splintered reed as a staff? Egypt. If a man leans on it, it will go into the palm of his hand and pierce it. Thus Pharaoh, king of Egypt, is to all who trust in him. But if you say to me, We trust in Adonai our God, is it not he whose high places and whose altars Hezekiah has removed? And then to and then said to Judah and Jerusalem, You must worship before this altar in Jerusalem. So now make a bargain with my master, the king of Assyria. I'll give you 20,000. I'll give you 2,000 horses if you can put riders of your own on them. So how can you repulse a single lieutenant, the least of my master's servants? Yes, you are relying on Egypt for chariots and for horsemen. Moreover, have I now come up against this land to destroy it without Adonai's approval? Adonai said to me, Go up against this land and destroy it. Then Eliakim and Shebna and Joah said to Rabshakeh, Please speak to your servants in Aramaic, for we understand it. Don't speak to us in the language of the Jews when the people on the wall are listening. But the Rabshakeh said to them, Has my master sent me only to your master and to you to speak these words, and not to the men who sit on the wall, who will eat their own waste and drink their own urine with you? Then this Rabshakeh stood and cried with a loud voice in the language of the Jews, and said, Hear the words of the great king, the king of Assyria. Thus says the king, Don't let Hezekiah deceive you, for he will not be able to deliver you out of my hand. Nor let Hezekiah persuade you to trust in Adonai by saying, Adonai will surely deliver us. This city will not be given into the hand of the king of Assyria. Don't listen to Hezekiah, for thus says the king of Assyria, Make peace with me, and come out to me. Then everyone will eat from his own vine and fig tree, and everyone will drink water from his own cistern, until I come and take you away to a land like your own land, a land of grain and wine, a land of bread and vineyards, a land of olive and honey, that you may live and not die. So don't listen to Hezekiah when he misleads you by saying, Adonai will deliver us. Have any of the gods of the nations delivered his land from the hand of the king of Assyria? Where are the gods of Hamath and Arpad? Where are the gods of Sepharvaim, Hena, and Irva? Have they delivered Samaria from my hand? Who among all the gods of the lands have delivered their country out of my hand? So will Adonai deliver Jerusalem from my hand? But the people were silent and did not answer him a word, for the king's commandment was, Do not answer him. Then Eliakim, son of Hilkiah, who was in charge of the palace, Shebna the scribe, and Joah, son of Asaph the recorder, came to Hezekiah with their clothes torn and told him the words of the Rabshakeh. And that is the end of chapter 18. And I'm going to pause it here and come back with the next part.